One of my favorite odd facts about The Simpsons is that they once did an episode in which Homer was gonna throw himself off a bridge. And it was the third episode of the series. Wow, who would have thought that this was the secret for running another 30 years? Obviously, from our point of view today, knowing how the show evolved, this is a puzzling way to go about things. It's yet another reason why season 1 of The Simpsons feels so off when going back to it. Homer's Odyssey is this hodgepodge of unexpected characterization, bizarre backgrounds, and off-model designs. Hello, Black Smithers. I personally always found this episode bleak and uncanny, even once declaring it the worst episode of season 1. On the other hand, it is interesting that the show actually went here, that it would push one of its lead characters to such lows. Is this just a case where I think something is bad because I don't like what the characters are doing? How is that fair? I mean, I praise Moaning Lisa for its stark depiction of Lisa's depression, yet I complain that this is too bleak. So, I want to give it another chance. How effective is Homer's Odyssey in conveying Homer's Odyssey of growth? Structurally, this plot is fairly straightforward. Act 1 belongs to Bart and his field trip, culminating in Homer's firing. Act 2 explores Homer's struggle as the family breadwinner and his deep sense of shame, culminating in his fateful decision to end it all. And in Act 3, Homer discovers a new cause to champion, culminating in him challenging his former boss. The plot has that nice upward trajectory to it, a story of a man finding his inner strength after reaching the lowest of lows. The biggest challenges are going to be in earning this moment and then pivoting toward a new goal. This challenge is compounded by their choice of how to spend Act 1, namely by introducing the power plant through Bart's eyes. Remember, this was Season 1. Of course the Simpsons are going to lean on America's Bad Boy. For what it's worth, I love the field trip. They do a great job showing off those small, relatable moments of waiting for the bus, Mrs. Krabappel keeping the kids organized, even who you get stuck sitting with. I love these upward and downward facing shots when talking to Otto, then how Sherry and Terry mess with Bart. To say this section is leisurely paced would be an understatement. They literally have Otto do another lap around the neighborhood. But it's so pitch perfect for this experience. I remember field trip bus rides feeling exactly like this. If only we all had the self-confidence as Bart at singing John Henry Was a Steel Driving Man. Then we meet Black Smithers, and they hit us with Smilin' Joe Fission, a character I only remember from trying to play Bart's Nightmare. Ugh. I don't think this film is one of The Simpsons' all-time greats. Like, it's no Troy McClure or anything, but it does nail that hokey 1950s education style, where they're certainly giving you new information, but you have that nagging feeling that you're being brainwashed in some way. I love how he just casually kicks away this last bit of nuclear waste. My favorite part is this question mark bit. Old slideshows always have this transition where they ask the audience some inane question. And this narrator's like, I don't know, so openly about it. Good stuff. The rest of the field trip is kinda whatever. Nothing particularly interesting happens through Black Smithers' tour of the facility, other than an early glimpse of Blinky. I guess Sherry and Terry provide a little setup about their dad calling Homer incompetent, which pays off almost immediately. The problem with this Bart-centric approach is that Homer literally and figuratively sideswipes the plot at the end of Act 1. We get one brief moment of Homer at his job, with this guy indicating how lazy he is, and then bam, Homer is fired. We get the absolute bare minimum of his work environment. This scene still does work functionally and flows logically, it's just underdeveloped. I think this Bart-centric approach would be useful in establishing how Bart sees his father, and it could create a sense of guilt later. There's a relationship dynamic built in, similar to that Christmas episode that year. That's why Bart is along for the ride in Act 3 in that episode. However, Bart doesn't factor into the rest of Homer's Odyssey. So while the field trip is a very fun diversion, it does take away valuable screen time from Homer. This ends up being a big deal, because Act 2 not only has to completely pivot toward Homer, but also has to shove him toward that emotional low. From a characterization perspective, this is certainly a mopier version of Homer than we're used to. He gets a minor boost in confidence, but those doors of opportunity quickly get slammed in his face. The episode does a nice job of providing that holistic view of unemployment. That the whole world seems to be rejecting you. Even folks like Mo won't give you a break. Where you're so broke that even a simple beer, the most minor of luxuries, is out of reach. Attacking Homer's love of beer is a great way to get him down in the dumps. It ages especially well, given how his alcoholism is portrayed later in the series. I really like how they portray these two scenes in particular. Just Homer lying on the couch like a zombie, too dejected to even move. That the kids have given up on him and are just taking whatever they can. This would be emasculating for someone like Homer, that he can no longer support his family. I appreciate the pragmatic detail of the story that obviously Marge isn't sitting on her hands. She brainstorms her own way of keeping them afloat. Hey look, it's the rare jerk-ass Otto appearance. One of my favorite subtle bits of commentary happens when the kids awaken Marge about being robbed and they go downstairs to look for Homer, suggesting that Homer has moved to sleeping downstairs on the couch. Obviously Marge didn't kick him out of bed, Homer has just exiled him to the couch of unemployment. Wow, it's just like when Gil lived with them for a while. Wait, Otto parked himself on that couch too. That really is the couch of unemployment. Obviously, much of this feels like the prototype Homer gets fired plot that we'd see in later episodes like Burns for Coffin or Kraftwerk. That episode also leaves Homer depressed, picking at a toaster and bumming around at Moe's. Coincidentally, that one had a Bart prank call too. But that episode doesn't need to shove Homer to these lows, because they're building toward a heated exchange and a Burns humiliation. I think a better comparison would be I Married Marge, also from season 3. That one plays things much broader and wackier, with shorter scenes of him selling knives and making crappy candles. Still, despite the lighter tone, it builds to a similar inner conflict, of Homer feeling like a failure for his family. And Homer makes another dramatic decision. The key difference is that this is the product of everything we'd seen up to that point. It's quite clear from the get-go how they're just scraping by. Homer's feeling of inadequacy and shame is baked into his decision to exile himself from Marge. I'm not saying that I Married Marge is perfect, and I agree with Homer's decision, but it's thematically and characterizationally consistent. Homer's Odyssey only has about 4 minutes of runtime to get Homer to this dark, depressive hole, and uses the piggy bank as his breaking point. I like the piggy bank. It's probably the most interesting moment in the whole episode, to be honest. It balances the "what have I done" with his desperation. So perfectly Homer. But as the tipping point for wanting to end it all, meh. It's like the power plant firing, where I understand logically why Homer is fired, why Homer feels so much shame, but since we don't spend much time with him, that they're unable to build it up, I watch it with more of a theoretical understanding than actually getting in his headspace. It's surprisingly shallow. I thought originally that maybe my problem was that I just think it's too dark for a show like The Simpsons to handle. But I don't think it's the topic itself that disqualifies it. 18 seasons later, we literally see Homer standing on that same bridge, contemplating the exact same thing. And I've never had a problem with this plot point, and I've heard very few people criticize it. The plot of Eternal Moonshine is entirely constructed to push Homer toward that breaking point. Right from minute 1, Homer is questioning what he may have done. So yeah, this isn't an inherently bad idea conceptually, but speedrunning it in Act 2 definitely is. Even The Boy's a Bummer builds this better than Homer's Odyssey, and they were speedrunning it too. I feel like we need to make a new rule for The Simpsons, that characters are not allowed to try to off themselves after only 1 act worth of adversity. We're instituting a 2-act minimum. That said, the Winfields comment is hilariously dark and is probably my favorite moment in series history from them. They're just so ghoulishly joyful about the prospect of Homer's death. Then later, the way they transition into the Act 3 safety plot is pretty clever. Homer still deeply cares for his family, and it makes sense it would provide something for him to live for. The Act 3 safety plot fares much better overall, but is dragged down by being kind of boring in general. It's difficult to make safety an exciting topic for the audience. It's probably why in that later episode they had Homer dress up like a salamander, just to spice things up. It's a smart idea to give Homer a new lease on life, and ultimately a new job at the power plant. However, him going to the council meetings about stop signs and whatnot is pretty dry. Ooh, Homer's enacting infrastructure improvements through proper channels. Scintillating. We get a funny Chief Wiggum debut out of it, and this newspaper montage, I suppose. It's just another reminder that we're in season 1, where they're not gonna bounce around and get silly with a concept. The pivot toward the power plant as the final boss does give Homer's Odyssey a nice sense of plot symmetry. This is like the granddaddy of Homer Burns showdowns. Now, Homer going after the plant does kind of come out of left field. Power plant safety was never the focus of Act 1. In fact, you could argue that the plant is already competently run, since they swiftly fire Homer after doing something unsafe. On the other hand, they did provide this Smilin' Joe Fission joke and showed off how they're polluting a nearby lake. And Homer delivers that joke pointing out how incompetent he was when he worked there. So his crusade is supported by the text of the episode. It's just funny how later examples have Burns hiding nuclear waste or whatever. Oh, season 1, you had no idea how bad things were gonna get. But enough of that. We gotta talk about this crowd scene. What is this? Why is it on my TV screen? Look, I'm sympathetic to the plight of Klasky Chupo in these early days, where the writers threw them these difficult crowd scenes. But I just have so many questions about these designs. Why are these two Barts' heads stuck together? Why is there an elf? What is up with this guy's forehead? Watch out, Bart, this angry guy is gonna eat you. You know things are dicey when I'm not even pointing out Black Smithers. One of my favorite randos is this mask guy or red glasses guy. But he doesn't hold a candle to Bobby over here. Look at how happy he is. I know he doesn't have a name, he just seems like a Bobby to me. Oh, speaking of weird backgrounds, look at this painting of Mr. Burns on a green horse. This is the real tragedy of them redesigning Mr. Burns' office. We lost the green horse. In terms of Homer Burns showdowns, obviously this doesn't hold a candle to any of their later shenanigans. Where are the snowmen? Where are the fisticuffs? Where is the confusing sexual tension? I do appreciate that the episode gives Homer his chance to stand up for what he believes in. They could have played it as a tough negotiation where Homer gets the upper hand and wins a stable new job out of it. But instead, they insert this moment of doubt. They give Homer the opportunity to sell out his beliefs for the crowd, one final moment for him to push through and prove his mettle. They end up having their cake and eating it, giving him the job anyway, but at least it provides him a philosophical victory. The only strange thing about this victory is that, prior to Act 3, this was never a journey about Homer standing up for his beliefs. This was never an episode about a cause. But as a more general comeback story, sure, I'm satisfied. We have reached a comfortable new status quo. Arguably, this is one of the most important episodes in series history, in that Homer stays in this same role for the next 30-something years. In that sense, Homer's Odyssey is definitely one of those episodes that could have only happened in season 1. And that's its greatest appeal for me. The origin story aspect of it, the unusual choices that were made. I made fun of them for having Homer wanting to throw himself off a bridge in episode 3, but honestly, this moment would be even more wildly out of place in seasons 3 or 4. I watched season 1 for the roughness, that odd experimentation, and Homer's Odyssey certainly scratches that itch. That said, I do still think this is the worst episode of season 1. This rewatch did not soften that stance. It's not especially pretty to look at animation-wise, and it doesn't contain that many memorable gags relative to the rest of the season. But I think Homer's Odyssey's biggest issue is that it doesn't fully commit to it being a Homer story. That they don't lay the foundation of Homer's journey in any meaningful way in Act 1. That's why the darkness of Act 2 never connects as strongly as it should, and why Homer's Act 3 crusade feels like a swerve. Bart's field trip, as much as I love it, does result in an unfocused character arc for Homer. Say what you want about the questionable climax of Homer's Night Out, at least the Homer-Bart dynamic is consistent in that story. The spy camera leads to something. You always know what that episode's about. Homer's Odyssey is much more incoherent. I do admire it for laying the groundwork for so many future Power Plant episodes. This was their first run at this dynamic, so of course they weren't going to nail it on their first go-round. I do respect Homer's Odyssey in that sense. But much like the crowd scene, the end product is a bit too rough and unrefined. Also, when are they gonna bring back Black Smithers? Just put him in one episode, don't even explain why. You know you want to.